Hello, everybody. Chris here. Welcome back. Happy fourth Sunday of Lent. This is Laetare Sunday, one of the two liturgical days of the year where rose is the liturgical color. Not pink, mind you, rose, of course. Um, and this week, for March 30th to April 5th, we have a couple of great saints, as always, that we want to kind of get into today. So without further ado, let's start right off. First saint we have for April 2nd is Saint Francis of Paola. So St. Francis was born in the year 1416 in Paola, which is in Calabria, which is in southern Italy. And he was born to very poor but also very holy parents. His parents were childless for some time after they were married and just prayed to St. Francis of Assisi, as their patron to just ask for a son. They really wanted a child. And they promised that if they had the son, they would dedicate him to God's service. And this prayer was eventually granted, and they did end up having a son who they named Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. And, they eventually went on to have two other children, but their oldest son, Francis, is the one we'll be focusing on today. He, as a baby, he suffered a swelling, actually, which put his eyesight in danger. So, his parents, being the holy people that they were, turned back to the intercession of St. Francis for their son. And then, they vowed that if he was cured, they would have their son pass a year as a Franciscan brother. And he was cured of this ailment, Francis, and from a very early age, he was just known for very great sanctity. Even as a child, when he became kind of a mid to late teenager, he actually himself chose to take his parents' vow upon himself and join the Franciscans, and to which he spent a year with them. Then when he returned home, he accompanied his parents on a pilgrimage to Assisi in Rome. And it was after this pilgrimage they kind of came back just very energized and made the decision that he was going to live in solitude. In Paola, he chose like a little sea cave, down by the ocean or by the Mediterranean Sea, I suppose, and just devoted his entire life to just prayer and mortification, to penance. And he spent 6 years doing this. And over this time, he started to attract a following. People would go down to see him. They're very intrigued by this lifestyle he was living, by this hermit, lifestyle that he had. Around 1435, he had two others join him in his cave, where he built, the kind of three cells and then a small chapel for them. His disciples continued to grow, and by the year 1454, Pyrrhus, who was the Archbishop of Cosenza, kind of over the area where he lived, gave Francis permission to build a monastery and a church, kind of for his burgeoning order of just religious that he had. And he's just known for great joy, just the great joy and the great celebration that he brought to the community. They kind of really loved having him around. He was known for a lot of miracles and just being a very holy and devout person. By the year 1474, he actually got permission from Pope Sixtus IV to kind of have his own rule, kind of start his own order officially. And his rule was basically to have perpetual abstinence, perpetual Lenten fast, as he called it. He devoted himself and those who joined him to poverty, to humility, and eventually, under Pope Alexander VI, who's the infamous Rodrigo Borgia, Renaissance Pope, under Pope Alexander, his order was given the name of the minimums. So this comes from the minimi, which basically means, the least, right? The least in the kingdom of God. That was kind of the idea of what he saw him and his order as. They were trying to minister as kind of the least amongst all. So this order quickly grew, became very famous throughout Calabria and Sicily as a whole. They founded several new monasteries throughout the region. They even established a convent of nuns for women religious who wanted to join them. And he even incurred the wrath of King Ferdinand of Naples, who kind of ruled the area, for a very public rebuke that he gave to him. So, Francis was one for just kind of living the holy life and not being too concerned about kind of who he frustrated along the way in the temporal secular world. Eventually, under Pope Sixtus IV, he requested that Francis travel to the court of the French king, King Louis XI. As Louis XI was getting on in age, he was ailing. The Pope really wanted to give Louis somebody very holy to kind of help him prepare for his death. So Francis was chosen, and he initially declined, but then with the Pope's insistence, he decided to be obedient to the Holy Father and decided to accept this new ministry. So he traveled to France, where he was with King Louis when he died in the year 1483. King Louis died in that year. And then, after, in the late years of Louis's reign, and even after the king died, he was Saint Francis was very close to the Dauphin Charles, who became Charles VIII, who became king after his father died. So Francis continued to minister to him. The crown, he became very beloved around the court. So the crown even funded his order of the minimums, expanding to France. So the king kind of funded having a monastery in the kind of around the royal residence in Plessis in France. And then after Charles VIII died, and then Louis the 12th became king, he also held Francis in very high regard. So, around this time, Francis was kind of starting to itch for home, wanted to go back to Italy. But Louis was very insistent that he had to remain in France. He really valued having him in court. So Francis remained there in France until his death on the 2nd of April in 1507, where he died in Plessis in France. He was canonized by Pope Leo X in 1519. And, his tomb, which, obviously remained in France, was actually plundered by Protestant Huguenots in the year 1562. The Huguenots were kind of a Protestant movement that kind of, in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, became very popular in France amongst, some of the, a lot of the people and even some of the nobility. And in 1562, they plundered the tomb of St. Francis, and it said that when they found the body was incorrupt. However, they ended up burning the body and kind of scattering the ashes. And however, some relics of him do still remain to this day. So, as we said, his feast day is on April 2nd, which is this coming Wednesday. The second saint we have today, April 4th, for April 4th, is Saint Isidore of Seville, church father. Saint Isidore was born in Cartagena, Spain, around the year 560. So this is in the 6th century. So this is a very early church. Like I said, he's a church father. He was born to his parents' names were Severianus and Theodora. And he actually had 3 siblings, so there's 4 in total. And actually all of them are saints. All of Isidore and all of his siblings are considered saints by the church. So we have Saint Leander of Seville, his older brother, was actually also the bishop of Seville. We had Saint Fulgentius, who was bishop of Astigi, and then Saint Florentina, his sister, was also a very holy nun. So a family of very holy men and women, and even several bishops came out of that line. So from a very early age, Saint Isidore was tutored by the priests and religious of Seville, where he grew up. His older brother Leander, who was the archbishop, was a very strong mentor to him. They were very close. And, they both worked together to convert the Arian Visigoths. This is in between 560 and 600. So this is about 100 years after the Roman Empire fell. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476, which, we say it fell, but the emperor himself, was deposed. However, obviously Roman administration persisted in most of the Western Europe at the time, because, that's just the way things have been going. So, it took some time for the other governments, when you had groups like the Visigoths or the Gaul, in Gaul, what became France, you had the Franks, the Germanic tribes. It took some time kind of for while they were ruling, for their society to kind of, integrate with the Roman society. So, this was all kind of happening around this time. The Visigoths move in. Unlike the mainstream Catholic Orthodox Christianity of the day, the Visigoths kind of had a brand of Arianism, which they followed. Leander and Isidore both worked very hard to kind of convert them to, true Catholic Christianity. Leander died in the year 600. Saint Isidore took over for him. He was elected bishop right after his brother was. In his time as archbishop, again, during this very time of, very tumultuous time of change, Western Roman Empire, the institutions are disintegrating with, the 100 years that have passed. The Visigothic culture is really starting to take root a bit more. St. Isidore just worked tirelessly to preserve knowledge and wisdom of the past amidst all these changes. He was a huge promoter of just that synthesis between Roman and Christian culture, which had been flourishing for centuries at that point. He was a big fan of, Greek thought and some of those early philosophies. He also did a lot of work, as we said, preventing false heresies from continuing to spread, championing Catholic Christianity against the Arianism of the day, and just really encouraging the development of all sorts of different fields: law, medicine, foreign languages, philosophy. He's considered instrumental in kind of the creation of some of the Visigothic law, which kind of came about in the wake of obviously the Roman Empire being disintegrating. And this law basically just kind of fused the idea of you had the Roman citizens, right, and you had the Visigothic citizens. And under the Roman Empire, the Germanics were kind of considered, a second-class type of citizen compared to the Roman citizen. However, under this new law, as these two societies are blending together, there's very much, and Isidore was part of this, very much championing the idea of Romans or Visigothics. We're kind of all one now. We're all under one kingdom. So he was very instrumental with that. He also compiled what's called the Etymologiae, which is the first recognized Catholic encyclopedia. So again, just a very prolific writer. He had a lot of great writings. He was a champion of knowledge, of wisdom, of information. He wrote a lot on a lot of different topics. He's known to write on grammar, on law, on medicine, on theology, on church law, on geography. So he was just very much, what you come to know as like a Renaissance man. Somebody who had interest in a bunch of different places and just had a great thirst and love for compiling that and talking on that and preaching on that and just all around writing kind of on that. He's considered the last of the Latin fathers. So in the era of the church fathers, there's the Latin fathers, there's the Greek fathers, there's the Syriac fathers, the desert fathers. There's a bunch of these different classes, and in the Latin fathers, which come from the West. So you got like Gregory the Great, Saint Augustine, these types of people. He was kind of the last in that line. He died on April 4th, 636. So actually right around the dawn of out in the Middle East, what would be of Islam, kind of is around the same time. So he died in Spain around this time. He was named a doctor of the church just because of his prolific writings. And interesting fact about him, he was actually made the patron saint of the internet by St. John Paul II because of his just determination to use the world's accumulative knowledge for the glory of God, right? He was so prolific, first Catholic encyclopedia, brought all these different fields together. So in very much in spirit, that's kind of what the internet is, right? Kind of a bringing together of all these things. So I'm sure one day he'll be side by side with blessed soon-to-be St. Carlo Acutis on that. But again, Isidore of Seville, very fascinating early church figure. So the last saint we're going to talk about today, for April 5th, is his feast day, is St. Vincent Ferrer. St. Vincent was born in Valencia in Spain on the 23rd of January in the year 1350. So we're back in the Middle Ages now, in kind of late Middle Ages here. He completed his education in philosophy at the age of 14, and he joined the Dominican order in 1367 at the age of 17. So very early on, he knew his calling was to become a priest, joined the Dominicans, and by the year 1370, so only a couple of years as a Dominican, he was teaching philosophy at a university in Lerida in Spain. So very smart, very well read, very well educated. He taught, preached, and served the poor throughout Barcelona, Valencia, Toulouse, just kind of all over where the Dominicans needed him in kind of northeastern Spain, and then also in southern France. And around the year 1379, he was retained by Cardinal Pedro de Luna, who was the legate of the court of Aragon. So he was kind of the papal legate to the court of the Aragonese crown, so the King of Aragon. And Saint Vincent Ferrer kind of became like his secretary of sorts. And Cardinal de Luna actually became the Avignon anti-pope Benedict XIII. So bit of a history lesson for kind of some context here. So in the 1300s, there became a controversy in the church, which is known as the Western Schism. So there's a period around the year 1309. You had Pope Clement V and King Philip IV. And King Philip was the king of Spain, the king of France, and Pope Clement was the Pope of Rome. Now, Clement was invited by King Philip to kind of come live in Spain, kind of, hey, I'll be your patron. There's a lot of kind of political machinations at the time. So the Pope decided, yeah, okay, I'll move my court. He's still Bishop of Rome, obviously, but he's Bishop of Rome basically living kind of in Avignon in France, where the king put him up. So this kind of started a period known as the Western Schism, as the Avignon Papacy. You had these popes who became elected, and they were valid popes because they were still elected as the Bishop of Rome by the cardinals. However, they actually lived in France. Many of them never even went, to Rome. So they're kind of ruling from afar. The Bishop of Rome, and during this time, the papacy just became very corrupt. It was it was very dominated by just the French politics of the day. So close to the French king, he could kind of control what happened in the court of the Pope and kind of control what was going on there. So not a great period for the papacy. Pope Gregory the 11th became Pope in 1377. Again, he became Pope in Avignon. However, he became Pope before 1377, but in 1377, that year, he decided to return back to Rome, right? This is the Pope who St. Catherine of Siena would tirelessly write and just say, hey, you got to come back to Rome. You got to come back to Rome. You're Bishop of Rome. That's where you're meant to be. That's where God wants you. You need to come back here. So she kept pestering him. And eventually he decided, all right, you know what? I'm going to go back to Rome. So in 1377, he went back. However, he really wanted to go back to France. The Rome was kind of very adamant that they wanted to keep him there. The people were very kind of belligerent on that fact, and he was kind of put off by that. So he planned to return to France. However, he died the next year in 1378, so he never got to return. So the Romans, again, really wanted to keep the Pope there. So Pope Urban VI was elected, in Rome by the cardinals. And many of them felt that they were kind of coerced by the people to do this. So there was actually a subset of them who fled to a different town in Italy, and they elected a different Pope, Pope Clement the Seventh, who was an anti-pope. So he was not considered a valid Pope by our reckoning today. However, at this time, you had these two popes now with these competing claims. The people who elected Clement said that Urban was invalid. And of course, the supporters of Urban and the people in Rome said, no, Clement's invalid. Clement fled back to Avignon and lived there while Urban stayed in Rome. So now you had kind of these two popes. People are taking different sides. In the year 1409, there was a third claimant elected in the city of Pisa in Italy. So now you had three popes at this point, and eventually this whole mess came to a head and was settled at the Council of Constance in 1414, between 1414 and 1418, where the council basically met. The Pope of Rome at the time agreed to resign to kind of quell some of the tensions. The other two claimants, the Pisan one and the Avignon one, were kind of deposed. They agreed to resign themselves, and then a new pope in Rome was elected. So that's kind of the quick overview of the Western Schism, which is important to mention because we have St. Vincent Ferrer, who was very kind of involved in some of these machinations here. So he was brought to Avignon, where his patron, Cardinal, what was his name? Cardinal Pedro de Luna, became one of these anti-popes, right? One of these false popes who reigned after this Clement VII guy. He became anti-pope Benedict XIII. So St. Vincent Ferrer, of course, was a friend of his, so didn't see any reason to doubt his claim, right? Again, you have to think at this time, you had two popes. Like nowadays we can look back and say there was all these anti-popes, but back then it was, oh, okay, two people are claiming to be the pope. I got to kind of go with what I think is best here. I got to kind of discern for myself. Very, very confusing time in church history. Thankfully, we're not there right now. So St. Vincent Ferrer, supporter of this Avignon Pope, he became kind of the apostolic penitentiary and master of the sacred palace of the Pope's court. Apostolic penitentiary, I had to look it up because I wasn't really sure what that meant. That's a role that's apparently still around today. And today, the person, the roles they're given is they're responsible for the absolution of excommunications reserved to the Holy See, dispensation of sacramental impediments reserved to the Holy See, and the issuance and governance of indulgences. So basically, in many ways, he just kind of controls the departments that deal with giving the church's mercy in these situations, right? So people are excommunicated. This is the office that's dealing with resolving those issues. Any impediments to the sacraments related to the Holy See, this office is doing that, and then also kind of issuing indulgences. So St. Vincent Ferrer was responsible for this. And throughout his time in the Avignon court, he refused other honors that were given to him. He's even offered a cardinalate at one point. Hey, you can become a cardinal. And he said, no, thank you. I'm kind of good where I am right now. He's just known as kind of a very holy, humble guy in that way. And then in the year 1398, the French king withdrew his support of Avignon. Up until this point, the French king was very pro that, but he kind of switched sides and decided to kind of back another claimant. So due to this, he sieged the city. And during this time of this siege, St. Vincent was struck ill and had a miraculous recovery, but kind of during his recovery period, saw a vision of Christ, St. Dominic, and St. Francis kind of commissioning him, telling him to go preach penance in preparation for Judgment Day, just to the people, right? So spurred by this, he went to anti-Pope Benedict and said, hey, look, this is what God's calling me to do. Will you give me permission to kind of go off on this ministry, on this apostolate. In 1399, the Pope agreed. So, St. Vincent kind of went off and started preaching just throughout Europe. He first went to Provence in France, kind of southern France, preaching in squares and open places, went to Dauphiny, Saxony, or Savoy. Saxony is in Germany. Savoy is on the border of France and Italy, and also in the Alpine region. So he went there and just spent a lot of time just kind of converting the Cathar heretics, the Waldensian heretics that kind of lived in those areas. He reached Italy and met the future Saint Bernardine of Siena and also Blessed Margaret of Savoy. So two holy people in their own right. As Saint Vincent kind of went around preaching, he started to just kind of gather this flock of people who would follow him around and kind of were devoted to his teaching. He had at one point over like 10,000 people following him, and it was well known that there was no scandal in these ranks. Like he kind of ran a very tight ship. Kind of kept the people to a very high holy standard. During this time. And it was a very multicultural group. Again, we're going through France into Italy here. This is in the time before like French and Italian were the main languages. So you're dealing with all of these different local languages that people are speaking. And St. Vincent was only known to know his native tongue, from Valencia in Spain. So he never knew any of these other languages. So, because of this, he was known for the gift of tongues, like we read in the Acts of the Apostles, when St. Peter and the apostles are preaching after Pentecost, you have all these Jews from all over the world, Greeks, Elamites, you have people from Syria, you have people from Cyrene, just all over the kind of the world at that time who could understand them, even though they were just Galileans speaking in Aramaic, so St. Vincent was, it seems that he also had this great gift and able to talk to people despite the languages. Everyone could understand him in their own tongue. So he spent 20 years doing this, just preaching this message of repentance. He was known just for this very austere life, and just living his preaching, just being very, very much of, walk the walk, talk the talk, or talk the talk and walk the walk, or what am I trying to say there? What's that saying? I'm not really sure. Anyway, very holy man. And he actually lived to see the end of the Great Schism. So he actually was able to see like, all right, all these anti-popes and even the current legitimate pope resign so that they could elect one pope everyone could agree on. And he wholeheartedly embraced the pope who came out of that, Pope Martin V. And so, he ultimately did come kind of to the reunion that he didn't even realize he was out of. But in the end, he did come to reunion with the church. St. Vincent died on 5th of April, 1419, and then he was canonized by Pope Calixtus III at the Dominican Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome on the 3rd of June in 1455. So those are the saints we have today. And just one other thing I want to talk about, because it just came to mind as I'm kind of going through these saint stories, is these three saints, but especially St. Vincent Ferrer and St. Francis of Paola, their stories just really go to show the way that God can use even kind of the broken members of the church to prop up great people. You had these two great saints whose lives were kind of intermingled with, great sinners. You have St. Francis of Paola, who was, commissioned by, first Pope Sixtus IV, who, from what we know of his life and reign, may have been involved in kind of the Pazzi conspiracy to murder the Medicis in Florence, which failed. So, some kind of funny business there. And then, of course, Alexander VI, who's kind of the infamous Rodrigo Borgia, who had many children, and some of which he elevated to positions of high positions in Rome, in the Vatican. So, these two men who we tend to look at as some of the not as great popes, they had a hand in like propping up, St. Francis, in his ministry. So I don't know. I just find that very interesting how even, it just goes to show how God can use broken people, maybe not saintly people in their own right, but how they can still be used to kind of further the kingdom, right? Again, St. Vincent's a similar thing. You had an anti-pope who he was close with, who, today we look back and say, oh yeah, he was an invalid pope, but, he was still able to kind of help this great saint and allow this great saint to kind of go off and accomplish these great works, this great preaching that he did. So anyway, just wanted to kind of give a little thought there, just kind of something to think about as we continue to go through this wonderful Lent. So hope you all have a great day and a very blessed fourth week of Lent and very blessed Laetare Sunday.